People come from all walks of life. They all have lives they lead. Any and all are welcome here to come and chat with me.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Small Talk. Well, I'm really excited today because my guest is in Vermont, and she's just written a book. I think she just wrote a book, which I hope she's going to talk about. She is or was a writer, a journalist, and I'm just reading a little bit on from her Facebook page. Self-studied at University of Maryland College. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Elayne Clift. Welcome to the show, Elayne.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
I hope I did all of those things right.
Yeah, well, I'm still a writer and a journalist, and I just published a book, it's a pandemic poetry collection, open call collection, and I am the person who conceived and edited the book and got it published by University Professors Press. So that came out in June, and I'm happy to talk more about that.
Yeah.
I'll just say in terms of my background, I've had several iterations of career, but they're all kind of connected. I started out working in women's health nationally, women's health education and advocacy, which I loved in Washington, D.C. And then I went on to get a master's degree and worked internationally in health communications and education. But really, really my agenda was advocating for women and children, for maternal and child health. In the course of that, I began writing professionally, and also because of my women's health background, I had written professionally about during the decade for women, 75 to 85, and I attended the Nairobi conference and the Beijing conference, and one thing led to another, and I was invited to teach in schools of public health because my master's degree is in health communications, so I taught academically. But ever since the 80s, I've been writing not just professionally and journalistically, but in very many genres, short fiction, poetry, lots of creative nonfiction, a travel memoir, a couple of travel memoirs. So I just keep writing all the time.
Oh, that's
so
wonderful.
that became my main thing. So now I write, mainly I write and teach writing workshops and do a bit of lecturing.
Very good. Yeah, the reason why I said former, because that's what I read on your Facebook page.
No, my Facebook page is not, yes, it's not exactly done right. I don't know what happened there. I'll have to go in and edit it.
Oh, okay. All right. Because I feel bad that I got that wrong. But so tell me about your current book. Do you have a copy there that you can show us?
Yep. So let me see, how do I guess I show it to you that way.
Yes.
This is the cover. It's called A 21st Century Plague, Poetry from a Pandemic. And as I said, it was published by University Professors Press in June.
Mm-hmm.
The book has, I'm not the only one who's done a poetry anthology about the pandemic. In fact, I believe there's at least one narrative collection as well. But I'm very proud of this book because it's the poetry is just amazing. The poets are very diverse. They're national, in fact, somewhat international, because I have a British contributor and an Irish monk who's a contributor, and a woman who writes with the voice of an Indian woman because she's lived in India.
Right.
But the quality of the poetry is just so beautiful. And there are 70 poets. There should have been 71, but one of them, the editor, was very stiff about the idea that we couldn't figure out who to attribute the reprint right to, because the poem had gone viral. Her name is Lynn Unger. She's in Oregon. So I have 70 poets, 70 poems by 53 poets, including myself.
Right.
And one of my, most of them are award-winning, even pushcart prize winners. But the most famous writer in the book happened to be Marge Piercy, the novelist and poet Marge Piercy.
So if somebody wanted to buy a copy, now where would they get it?
So they can order it from Amazon. They can order it from the publisher, University Professors Press, and they can ask any bookstore to order it. It's distributed, the bookstores will know it's distributed by Ingram.
Okay, that's really awesome. Now let's back up a little bit about your work in Washington.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Let's start from there and can you give us a little bit more detail?
Yes, I worked for the National Women's Health Network, and when it was first starting, I was the first program director, and that was an organization that was had to say we were education and advocacy, because we couldn't lobby. We were nonprofit. You can't lobby,
Okay.
but we were basically lobbying the government on policy, and it was just everything, because everything is a women's health issue, or at least a woman's issue. And it was just an amazing time, because the women's health movement everywhere, but I think in particular for me in the States, was very powerful. The analysis that women were doing around women's health issues, and that was everything from mental health to breast cancer to depression depression and childbirth, and just everything, over medication, etc. And so I got to work with the Boston Women's Book Collective very, very much, and all the leaders of the movement. There was Rose Kushner, who single-handedly put a stop to Halstead radical mastectomy. There was Phyllis Chesler, who wrote about women in depression, and Paula Kaplan, feminist psychologist. And there were just these amazing women whose analysis of these issues and of women's issues was just astounding. And we really, really had an impact. And so that made me kind of like a little bit famous in Washington, because I used to do a lot of testimony and on air and media interviews and stuff like that. So that was my beginning.
Yes.
And then I moved on, got the master's degree, and moved on to maternal and child health issues at a nonprofit organization in Washington. We were the first project that USAID committed multi-million of dollars to for a health communications campaign. And that was in many countries around the world. And the objective was to get kids immunized and to treat dehydration with oral rehydration, also family planning and breastfeeding. And so that took me around the world doing that kind of work. And that I was in a more managerial position there. Yeah.
I was just going to ask you, what made you get involved in the first place? You know, there had to be some moment maybe, or whatever.
That's an interesting answer to that question. I'll start by saying that I was always drawn to, I don't know, for some reason, even as a child, I was a candy striper in the hospital, and I would always go to the nurseries to rock the babies and stuff. I happen to be a doula now. So that was really early on. And then I started college, but I switched to nursing school. And I wrote a poem about this. I was so terrified that I could kill somebody if I did something wrong that I dropped out of nursing school. And I eventually went back to college and onward. But the real answer to your question is that my mother was very much, I would say, a victim of the psychiatric establishment in the 1950s, because my mother suffered from depression, but it was pretty situational. Here was a brilliant woman with no education, in the wrong marriage, who was like Charlotte Perkins Gilman has written about, sort of going mad in isolation in post-war America, nothing, no work, and just motherhood, and, the whole thing. It wasn't enough for her. And I think what my mother was suffering from was anxiety attacks. I think she felt very trapped. And so very early in my life, she was hospitalized a lot, on and off. And I think what drew me to women's health, or why it worked so well for me to work in women's health, was because I really believed that my mother was terribly abused by this, over-medicated and so forth, shock treatments and everything. And I couldn't save her because I was too young, but maybe I could save some other women.
Yeah.
So I really think that's my driving force.
Yeah. Now, what do you think about, like, currently what's happening with women's issues and child health and that? Are things still moving forward? Do you think they've stepped back a little bit? Like,
we are so far back. Our Supreme Court just became the American Taliban, so the biggest issue, none of us who were in the trenches in the 70s and 80s can believe that we're still out here doing it again at an even worse level than before. This whole Texas thing, and many, many states are trying to emulate that has its roots not only in misogyny, but racism. And so that's a huge setback. Also, America is the very, very low, almost the lowest in maternal mortality and infant mortality. And we have a very two-tiered system. If you're poor, if you're Black, you will not get the same access and quality of care as affluent or higher middle class women. So there's a very important book that Maya Dusenberry wrote called "Do No Harm," and it documents all the ways in which women are treated badly by the medical establishment, starting with like not being believed when they tell their medical histories, that being particularly Black women, if they go to the emergency room in pain, are not given pain relief because they treat them as though they're seeking drugs.
Right.
And so there's just so many issues. Childbirth in this country is much better than it used to be, but there's still places where it's extremely medicalized, and it's not the midwifery model, So people's experience with birth can be traumatic and more difficult than it should be. So there's just any number of issues that, the network, as far as I know, is still solid, is still going, but I don't see them in the news like we used to be. And the Boston Women's Health Book Collective folded a few years ago.
Right.
So there are these great losses in terms of the places we could go to for information and that we could trust and so forth, woman-centered places.
If I think about it, and I'm sure you have, if you look at the situation for women right across the world, it's always the same thing.
Yeah.
Just different degrees, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I think there's a large underlying issue around why women are still, not getting ahead in their professions and in leadership and in science and all that kind of stuff. It's really still rooted in misogyny and patriarchy, but it also, because we always draw the links, it's also hugely to do with racism. And, just recently in the news here, one of the feminist reporters was talking about how there's a girl, I don't know if it made Canadian news, but there was a young woman who has disappeared and has been found dead out west with her fiance, who's now also disappeared, hiding. And that has been 24/7 news. In the last, I don't know how many years, a huge number of Native American women have just been disappeared in the same place where she is.
Right.
And nobody ever covered those stories.
Right.
Nobody covers the deaths of transgender women, which are very high.
Right. Yeah, it's so sad, I mean, we have similar things here in Canada. We're not any kind of exception.
Yeah.
I think for us, it's more with the Indigenous women, rather than the Black women, because that's, I don't know what the situation is for Black women here, but this has been in our news a lot, right? What's happening to
it's been out west. It's been Native women who go missing, and it never makes the news.
Yeah, for sure. So, those are hard topics. They really are, and I sometimes feel so helpless. But the only platform I can offer is, like, fortunately, my show. If I can help, get the word out, get the message out, I'm really happy to do that, because you don't always know how to help or what to do, right?
Yeah.
And we can only hope that the younger women will pick up that torch and just keep on doing whatever they need to do to get things changed. I just don't quite understand why there's always those step backs, Somebody put a post on Facebook, I don't know if you saw it, that there is nothing the government does that to do with men, that they're, with their bodies, like they can't do this or whatever it is. It's only women that are affected by it, right?
Yeah. I think one of the big deep-rooted causes of it, which is connected to what I said about misogyny and patriarchy, is that I think that the world of men is terrified of powerful women, terrified, which goes back to God, ancient times when, women could bleed and not die. And that was terrifying, and give birth. I mean, that was terrifying to men who were in warrior cultures, And I think that the loss of power and prestige among men, and particularly who make it to the top, even if they're sex abusers or whatever, I think they're just terrified of women. So many good prime ministers around the world now are women, and I think they're terrified of women's power. It's primal.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting, isn't it? Yeah. And change the topic a little bit again. So what's the future holding for you? What are your plans? Whether it's more continuing writing or whatever.
Yeah. So I'm sure that to my dying day, I'll be writing. And my form of activism largely now is, of course, I write letters and I call my Congress people and whatever. But my largest piece of advocacy is kind of like what you're doing. I do it as a journalist. I mean, I write political rants all the time as my columns. I have columns in 3 New England newspapers and Salon.com, and I have a big listserv and Facebook and all that stuff. So I get the word out that way, and so I have, I really use my voice and my writing skills to try and activate and educate people. Yeah.
Yeah, very good. Yeah.
So I will continue to write. I currently do a lot of workshopping, although God, they've all been on Zoom for now a year and a half. But I do writing workshops for women. I mean, I always like to do them for women, but now I do them primarily in venues that serve adult learners.
Mhm.
And I still occasionally lecture, and sometimes every once in a while I'll get a paid gig as a consultant. But you know, I'm getting up there, and I don't stop, but I just don't get to do it the same things I used to do. When I first came to Vermont, I served on the women's when the Vermont Women's Fund was also being born. I served on that for 6 years. I served on the state nursing board for 6 years and the Commission for Women. And, you know, those terms ended, and I'm just always sort of reinventing myself and trying to find my place in doing the things that I love. And one of the things I love is being a doula, but I've recently had to stop doing that because I can't pull the all-nighters anymore. I live about 35 minutes from the hospital, and I wasn't able to drive home safely.
Wow.
And, you know, I've said, you know, I said, Beverly Stills knew when to stop singing. I think it's time for me to stop being a doula.
Okay. All right.
But I miss.
Sorry. Yeah. So you mentioned when you moved to Vermont, where you're from originally?
Originally, I'm from New Jersey,
Mhm.
which, except for the tomatoes and corn and peaches and the beach, is a great place to be from, in my opinion.
Right.
When I was very young, I started traveling. Traveling is very big in my life, and I started traveling abroad by myself when I was in my 20s, and then moved to New York City with my college roommate, and we did our thing there. So it was New Jersey first, and then I lived in New York. I lived in London for a while. I've actually lived in Thailand for a year teaching, and we moved up here, my husband and I, from Washington, D.C. area about 22 years ago.
Oh, okay. So that obviously that's where you're going to stay.
Yes, I think so. Although I'll tell you what, I'm not going to stay here 12 months a year, depending on what happens on the midterm elections next year and on the 2024, because I really have to say I am terrified about what's coming at us in the States.
Right.
And if we lose the majority next time in the Congress, I think we're really in trouble. And we certainly are in trouble if some right winger makes it to the top of the presidency, because the other thing is the courts. The courts are terrifying us now. They're stacked with conservatives.
Yeah, it's a scary situation for sure.
Yeah.
Gosh, well, you know, we could talk more, but I don't know. There's so many different things to talk about. But what I want you to do is send me a link to all of yours so that I can share that with the audience, like when I post this, right? Where they can find your book, any websites or that you want people to link to, I can certainly share those. Okay, with you. So
that would be great. I have a website which contains my blog, so you can read any of my essays there. It explains why we came to Vermont. It gives you know, my bio, my list of books, and some of them are out of print now, but I have about a dozen books. This anthology is my 4th anthology. So, but most of them that are still available can be gotten through Amazon or a bookstore. The most recent ones you can still get through a bookstore.
Great. Yeah, great. You may have sent that in the email. I'm not sure, but just in case, resend it to me, and I will add that to, you know, and I'm hoping to get this aired today. If it's just sometimes it takes a while to get things. I got to put in one spot and upload it to another spot.
Yeah, and when if people go to the website, they can send me messages that way that come through into my email, and then I can answer them if they have questions or whatever.
Oh, that's fabulous. All right, that's fabulous. So again, thank you. Thanks for your patience and trying to get on with the Zoom and the links and my messing things up. But you know, I just double booked somebody at 2 people, so I have to change that around. Just my head's all screwed up because I'm overtired at the moment, and that's my excuse. Sorry for that. Anyway, thanks again for being on the show. Anytime if you want to come back, I'm more than happy to have you back on.
Thank you. I want to say that I was delighted to see Teresa Martin on your show, which is why I contacted you.
Yes.
I was supposed to be in California to do a weekend workshop that she was going to host for women. And it just got canceled because of COVID. So I was really disappointed, but we're hoping to do it in the spring. That would be a fun thing to bring to your show to talk about. Absolutely.
I would love it. Okay. So, yeah, that would be fabulous. All right. Just get on camera while I say goodbye to the audience.
Okay. Can I just say, please remember to send me the recording link.
I'm sorry, this? Oh, definitely. I will share this with you. Absolutely. Not a problem at all. All right.
Okay. Thank you so much, Nancy. A pleasure to be with you.
Thank you. And I appreciate you being here. And thank you for watching, everybody. Stay safe and peace out.
A sense of community, Chilliwack's a place to be. A sense of community where you're free. Rolling through the mountains, rolling through the valley, rolling through paradise with me. It's multicultural, you're sure to see it all. Chilliwack's the place to be, you'll see. Come party in the park, go dancing after dark. Chilliwack's the place to be, you'll see.